Hi there, I'm Woolly Wormhead and welcome to my channel. Today I want to demonstrate how to work a German short row. When we talk about these techniques, whether it's a German short row or a wrap and turn short row or Japanese short rows, what we are talking about is the method that we are using to neaten our short rows in our knitting and to help it integrate into the fabric better. Now, what is a short row? Well, it is literally a short row. It means that you're working either an incomplete row or round if you're working in the round, and you're turning and going back, so it creates kind of like a little wedge in our knitting. It's a shaping method. Short rows are shaping methods. And when I say German short row, that's not actually the whole kind of, the short row isn't the whole thing. It's the mechanism that we use at the end of that row before we turn, so that when we work across it again, we can hide holes and neaten up our fabric. Wrap and turn is another really common method. And I actually teach a longer class comparing the two methods because I think they're both fantastic. They're both quite common now and they have advantages and different disadvantages and are suited to different places, and also your personal tension and personal preferences come into it as well. I'm not saying German short rows are the best, but I use them a lot in my patterns. It's my personal preference for a lot of things. Now, when you are working something like short row colour work, which is, let's have a look at something like this. This is a new design that's coming out in autumn 2025. It's actually a sideways knit hat, and it's worked in short row colour work, which is a technique that I developed and wrote a book about. And because the pattern, the motif, the colour work is created entirely by short rows, you need a short row method that's quick and easy to knit across, and that is also easy to graft because some of the sideways knit hats do have some grafting in them. And this is why I recommend German short rows. It hides in Garter Stitch really well, and they are so quick to work. There's no extra steps that you actually need to create a German short row. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring in some swatches, and I'm going to demonstrate on the overhead camera how to actually work them. I'm going to demonstrate I'm going to demonstrate working German short rows in Garter Stitch, stocking stitch and reverse stocking stitch. With each swatch, I'm going to use a contrasting yarn to show you how the short row is actually created, so that you can see the component of German short rows, how it's actually kind of like constructed and put together. So let's switch to the overhead now and let me show you the first method in Garter Stitch. Okay, so here I have a swatch that I prepared earlier in a pale blue yarn, and I have a contrasting yarn that's a kind of greenish brown. And I'm going to work the short row in this colour so you can see what it looks like. So let's wrap that yarn towel around the back and hold them there. And I'm going to knit a few stitches in this contrast colour. And then we're going to work the short row technique after I've worked my number of stitches. So I am going to cross, how many? I've got 2, 4, 6, 7, knit one more. I've got a K8, and I am now going to work the German short row on this stitch here. Now, one really important thing to remember is that in my patterns, I would say K8 short row. That means that if you're going to use the wrap and turn method, you'd work the wrap on that stitch. Or if you're using the German short row method, you knit this stitch to work the German short row, because the German short row is based on a knit stitch. Okay, and some patterns are written so that the last stitch of the instruction is a turned and that becomes the double leg, but I don't write it like that because I want you to be able to have the chance to swap out your method and use which one that works for you. And also so you can understand where your short rows are and how it's happening. Gives you some autonomy and understanding of your knitting. So do remember that if you're working one of my patterns, the short row happens after the instruction, and that might mean to knit the stitch. Okay, so because we're going to work a double leg stitch here, which is the one that we create in German short rows, I'm going to knit the next stitch. So that's K8, 2, 4, 6, 8, short row. We're going to knit this last stitch here to turn it into the double leg stitch, the short rowed stitch. So we knit it. I turn and slip it purlwise to maintain orientation. Now, you can if you want to, and that is some people's preference, whoop, to slip it before turning. That is entirely up to you. I don't, because I find that this kind of ends up getting all loose and saggy. It's actually neater for me to leave it on this needle and turn and then slip. All right. It depends on your knitting style and your tension. Now, this stitch that we've just knit, this loop here in the brown, we're going to disappear this so that this stitch from the row below gets stretched all the way over the needle and becomes a double leg stitch. So I'm just going to hold this at the camera like this. Hopefully you can see what I'm going to do here. What we do, we pull this yarn really, really tight. And you can see here how it's pulling through. And we can see this stitch from the row below that we just knitted is being dragged all the way over the needle. And we want to make that nice and tight. And then you would knit the next stitch. All right. Now, one tip that I have is actually to anchor your needle in the next stitch that you're going to work, because it helps you make sure that that double leg stitch is really nice and tight and there's not much left of the disappeared stitch underneath, because that's what we call it. The stitch that we just knitted, that we just knit there, that gets disappeared. So that's the disappeared part of the German short row. And this one from the row below becomes the double leg stitch of the German short row, because it's in two parts, like a wrap and turn's in two parts. All right. So this tip, by anchoring the needle first, helps you make sure that your German short row is really nice and tight, because that's what you want. You want them nice and tight. So anchor it in, pull it over really tight, and then knit the rest of the row back to the selvage. Now, in the other color, in the pale blue, I'm going to work the next row. So show you, whoop, it's a bit loose there, how that works. Now, we can see here, let's pull that needle around, hold this up to the camera a little bit better. This is the stitch from the row below along here that we turned into the double leg stitch. This loop here was that stitch that we knit on the short row stitch and we disappeared it. That loop is important. These two have a relationship with each other to create the double leg stitch. They hook onto each other. And when we knit across, we're going to knit between them. So let me just do that now in the pale blue and show you how to knit across. You might think, oh, the anatomy of a German short row isn't all that helpful, or I don't need to know how to do it. And fair enough, if you don't need to know, you just want to know how rather than the why, that's fair enough. But I think the why is actually quite helpful, because especially if you want to repair it or do other things with it. So here we are, we're at our German short row with our double leg stitch here and our disappeared stitch here. We can see that's anchored into that row there. When we want to knit across, what we need to do is we need to put our stitches directly, we need to put our needle directly between the stitches, between the two parts of the German short row, like that. There's nothing else in between, and we just knit and we work to the end of the row. So let me get to the end and I'll quickly show you how that looks from the right side and the wrong side of the work. So this was the stitch that was double-legged. You can see a little bit of the disappeared stitch, but once we work a few more, you won't see that, that will go away. And there's the short row, and we've created a very slight wedge in our knitting. So I'm going to quickly, here it is on the back, where we knit those two legs of the double leg stitch together. It creates a little lump because you knitted two loops together. I'm now going to knit across the other side and work another short row so I can demonstrate to you again. And you can have a little practice of this. as well on a swatch, so you can give it a try yourself. Okay, so let me just untangle my yarns. It's always the way, isn't it? Okay, so let's work another short row. We won't do as many stitches this time. We'll do K4, and then we're going to work short row. So K4, the short row goes on the next stitch. And because it's a German short row, we have to knit the stitch because it's based on a knit stitch in Garter Stitch. So we knit it. That loop is going to be disappeared. We turn, slip it purlwise to maintain its orientation. Anchor the needle into the next stitch that's going to be knit, and then pull your working yarn really tight so that the stitch is disappeared. And then we carry on knitting back towards the selvage. We can see that wedge shape starting to happen now. So I'm now going to work across them again in the blue. I'm not worrying about keeping my selvages here particularly tidy because this is demo purposes. Okay, so there we have our double egg stitch again, all right, in two parts. That's the stitch that was disappeared. This is the stitch that we knit and turned into the double leg stitch. We put our needle up in between both, like that. It should be tight. Okay, so there we have the two parts of the stitch, and you just knit them. That's why I like them. German short rows, they're so easy. You just knit across. You haven't got to pick anything up. You haven't got to hold anything on a safety pin and deal with any loops afterwards. None of that. That's one of the upsides of German short rows. One of the downsides is that I've got a right and a wrong side. So when you are working German short rows on, say, in the short row color work, like the hat I showed you earlier, you will have the back and front of German short rows showing all the way through the fabric. But because it blends into Garter Stitch really easily, you don't really notice it. And when you're doing so many short rows, you want a method that works quickly for you. Okay, so we're just coming back to the end of that row. And there we can see we've created two short rows in our fabric. I say, don't worry about the selvages. I'm not keeping them particularly tidy because I'm just demoing. There are selvage treatments. I'll cover that in another tutorial. But there we go. That's two short rows worked in Garter Stitch using the German short row method. From the back, it's actually not as untidy as it might be. I find that wrap and turns are a little bit untidier on the back. These are a little bit kind of lumpy because you've just kind of knitted two legs together. It's like when you do a K2 together, you can feel it. It's two pieces of yarn knit together. But other than that, the bumps all hide in Garter Stitch really easily. So that's why I recommend it for working in Garter Stitch, because it disappears really nicely into the fabric. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change swatches and I'm going to show you how to do it in stocking stitch, and we'll have a look at how different it is, so ever so slightly different to working in Garter Stitch. Okay, here we have a swatch that I prepared earlier. And I've got a contrasting yarn in a purple that I'm going to work against the grey, and hopefully that will show you just how clearly the German short row is constructed. Now, I'm going to do exactly the same as I did before. I'm going to do a K8 and work a short row. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's just tidy that up there. Okay, so we're now K8 short row. So we're going to put the German short row on the next stitch. We're going to knit it because it's still based on a knit stitch. The only time it isn't based on knit stitch is if you're doing a reverse stocking stitch. Like if you've just purled that row, then you would purl the stitch that's going to be short rowed. We turn, we slip, And we do the same. We're going to make the double leg stitch by pulling this really tight. But that tip I showed you earlier about anchoring your yarn doesn't actually help here, because what we need to be able to continue back here is we need to have the working yarn on this side, because we're going to be purling our stitches. So what we do is we pull it really, really tight and then pull it between the needles, ready to purl. But this is another tightening mechanism, because you can pull it really tight from here and then go to purl and make yourself a really nice tight short row. Okay, so we're just purling to the end of the row there. We're going to turn, and with the grey yarn I'm going to knit across and show you how we work across here. And it's actually exactly the same as it is in Garter Stitch. So let's, sorry, that yarn is loosening up and making my knitting a little messy, never mind. So we're going to knit across those 8 stitches until we get to the stitch that we short rowed. And here, when we look at it, it still looks the same. There's the stitch that we disappeared. It's anchored behind here because it came from a different point, because we did a purl on the return row rather than a knit. On the Garter Stitch version, it was anchored at the front, but it's still anchored to that row below. And you treat it exactly the same. You knit between those points there. So they kind of like interlock. They're like an X, like a cross section. And you just knit across them like that. I'm going to knit to the end of this row, and then I'm going to purl back. We'll have a look at that short row from the behind. That's not bad. I have to say, I mean, I always used to prefer to work wrap and turn in stocking stitch until I started thinking, maybe I should use German short rows in stocking stitch. And I actually found in a lot of instances that German short rows actually neater in stocking stitch. Doesn't mean to say that I've given up on wrap and turn, because I haven't. I still think it's a brilliant short row method because it has no right or wrong side. Very highly adaptable, but that's a story for another tutorial. Okay, so there we are. That's it worked. On that side, and there it is on that side. And look how neat that is. Yeah, really nice and neat. So let's do one more. We're going to do the same as we did before. We'll do a K4 and then do a short row. So that stitch that we worked the short row on, that is what I reference as the short rowed stitch, i.e. a stitch that's been short rowed. You'll be familiar with that terminology from my books, but it's important to know that that stitch is a separate part of the knitting. As I was saying earlier, I like to kind of treat the short row as a separate part of the instructions in your knitting instructions, so that you have an understanding of where the short row is placed, and so that you can switch the methods if you want to. So that is the short rowed stitch. So we're going to knit it. As I say, if you prefer, you could slip it at this point before turning, but I prefer to turn first before slipping, because that stitch gets really loose for me with my style of knitting. So I slip now, and then I'm going to pull that over so that I can make, so this stitch is going to get disappeared just as we did before. This stitch is going to become the double leg stitch. So the one in grey becomes the double leg, the one in the purple gets disappeared. And because we need the yarn to be on this side so that we can purl back and finish, we're going to pull it really tight this way. And that's one way of tightening it up really nice. Because you do want a nice tight German short row. That's one of the keys to kind of getting it nice and neat, is to make sure that it's tight, so that the double leg stitch is stretched all the way over, and the stitch that gets disappeared is as disappeared as you can make it. So I'm now going to knit across that. whoop, and drop all my stitches. So let's start again. Let's go back. Okay. So, okay, 4. There's the stitch that was short rowed. There's our double leg stitch in the grey. There's the disappeared stitch, which are the loops that anchor it to this row here. And we knit in between them. You can see that there. There's absolutely nothing else. I don't know if I can actually bring it up closer to the camera to show you. There's nothing else in between there. The needle just goes straight between the two. And you just knit across. And that's it. It's why they're so good, is they are quick. You just knit across them or purl across them. You just treat them as a regular stitch. So that means you can graft them, means you can slip them, you can do anything with them really, because it's just a regular stitch. You'll treat it like a regular stitch. So let me just purl to the end now, purl back, and we can have a little look at that sample and see our 2 short rows that we've put in and how they've shaped the fabric and how they look. Because German short rows, they're pretty impressive in stocking stitch, I have to say. Okay, and so there we are. Excuse the messy selvages again. We're not worrying about that today. We're worrying about the short rows and how they look. And the disappeared stitch is actually much better hidden in this than it was in the Garter Stitch sample. Let's bring that in. There's a tiny, tiny hint of it there, just a tiny hint, but there isn't any hint along here. It's great. Looks so good. All right, so now I'm going to prepare a swatch in reverse stocking stitch and show you how to do a German short row from the wrong side or from the purl side. Okay, so here's our reverse stocking stitch swatch. It's in grey again. It's a good colour for showing off bright colours and showing up our short rows with. I've got a dark green that I am going to work a short row on reverse stocking stitch with. So let's get going with that. And excuse my selvages because they're not particularly tidy. That's not really important for today. We are going to purl 8, tighten that up so they don't come undone. We're going to purl 8 and we are going to work a short row on the next stitch, which would be the 9th stitch. So well, we've got 2, 4, 6, 7. We're going to do one more. So that's our purl 8. 2, 4, 6, 8. We're going to work a short row on this stitch here. So I'm going to purl it, turn, whoop. Now this is where we have to think about where our yarn wants to be on the other side of the work after we've created the double leg stitch. Now, our yarn needs to be at the back when we work a short row in reverse stocking stitch, because the second row or the return row is going to be all knit stitches. Now, if I slip this here and try and make a double leg stitch, it's going to get kind of like really awkward, because then you've got to try and put it all. See, it actually doesn't work particularly well, right? So this is the one instance where you will bring the yarn forward before you slip the stitch to turn it into a double leg stitch. And then what you do is you then take it over and you can anchor your needle in here to make it really tight. And let's see if we can make sure that you can see what's happening there. We are still making the double leg stitch, but it's slightly anchored differently because the yarn is at the front. It's pulling it that way. All right. And then we knit across to the end because this is the wrong side row of reverse stocking stitch. Then we're going to purl across, and I'm going to show you purl across in the grey. I think I've dropped a stitch down there, never mind. It's only the selvage, it's not important for this tutorial. Okay. Bring that yarn up, and we are going to purl across. And show you how you purl across a German short row. Before we've knit across the double leg stitch, this time we're going to purl it. And the same principle applies. This is our double leg stitch here in the grey. It is slightly twisted because of the fact that we brought the yarn forward before we made the double leg stitch. And this is the stitch that we disappeared. Now what you need to do is you'll need to go in between the two purlwise instead of knitwise. That's all you do. So let me see if I can bring that up a little bit closer for you. Go in between the two. There's the intersection point right there. And you just purl and drop it off. And there it is. So let's work one more like we did with the other swatches. So I'll knit to this end. Try and do it nice and quickly so you don't have to spend all your time sitting there watching me knit. If it goes out of focus while I'm speed knitting, I do apologise. I've got a very messy knitting style and now I'm an English thrower. Just been doing this for like 51 years. It's a little bit hard to change to a different style. Okay, so we are now going to work the next short row in green. We're going to purl 4, same as we worked 4 stitches last time on each second short row. 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to work the short row on that stitch. We purl it, we turn. Bring the yarn forward, slip it, anchor the needle in there, and turn that into the double leg stitch and knit across, back towards the end of the row. Yeah, see, I did drop a stitch. I thought I had. Doesn't matter. Okay, so we're now going to purl across that short row. And there we have the double leg stitch in the grey, the disappeared stitch in the green, and we put our needle in between them. So there's the intersection point there. Just purl across. Okay. If my drop stitch is now going to torment me for the rest of this video, it's not relevant. Okay, so there we are. There are our wedges that we created with our German short row technique in reverse stocking stitch, and they are just as neat. Just because we bring the yarn forward and the double leg stitch is slightly twisted because we bring it forward to wrap it over, makes no difference to the work because that's on the wrong side and we don't need to worry about it there. And in fact, it looks really nice and neat on the wrong side. So there you go. That's how you do them on reverse stocking stitch. So, all right. I've just shown you how to work a German short row in Garter Stitch, stocking stitch, and reverse stocking stitch. 3 different ways of doing it, depending on the stitch pattern and depending on how the return row is going to be worked, right? So do remember to think about where your yarn needs to be to work the return row. so that you can make sure that it's in the right place and think about how it's going to impact how you create the double leg stitch. Do you bring the yarn forward first? Does it need to move at all? You know, keep those things in mind. It's a similar principle to working wrap and turn, really. When you work a wrap and turn, you have to think about where your yarn needs to be to work the next row to help you make sure that you wrap the yarn in the most efficient, wrap the stitch, sorry, in the most efficient way. It's the same principle. And the other thing that I'm going to reiterate, because it is important, and you will probably hear me say it an awful lot in every other tutorial. If you ever take a class with me, I'll keep saying the same thing. German short rows, because they are worked on knit stitches or purl stitches, they are often included in the instruction. Different designers write different patterns, write their patterns in different ways. All right, if I ruled the world, we'd all write it in the same way, but I don't rule the world. And so this is something I think you need to be aware of so that you understand where your short rows are. So say, for instance, there is an instruction that says K27, turn work, make double lead stitch. That 27th stitch is the one that's going to be short rowed. So that's the same as me writing K26, work short row, because I'm separating the short row stitch in my instructions so that you know where it is. The other instruction is including it because it's being written for German short rows. It's including the short row in the instruction. I don't think that's a bad way of doing it. I'm not here to criticize anybody's pattern writing. What I'm kind of like trying to do is to help you understand where your short row is so that you know what its function is, if you need to move it, make any adjustments to your pattern, for instance, or if you want to change your short row method. So that K27 turn, make double lead stitch, if you were to do wrap and turn, you would do K26, wrap the next stitch, and then turn. All right. It's about giving you understanding of what your stitches are doing, really, so that you can change your methods, because you might love wrap and turn and love the way that it looks, and for your personal knitting style and your tension may be the best method ever, or Japanese short rows, or any other method, right? Because, you know, our knitting styles and our tensions are different. So why not have that information about where your short rows is, which stitch's going to be short rowed, so you can change it to suit you, right? That's what that explanation is about, but I do say it a lot because I think it's important to know. So I'll shut up about that now because I've probably said it enough. I hope that's helped to give you an idea, and hopefully you'll go away and practice doing German short rows, because it is a really cool technique, and also kind of like, you know, show you that short rows are not difficult. They are just another shaping method. They're no different to increases and decreases. They're just used in a slightly different way, but they are just a shaping method. They're not difficult at all. And if you ever want to try a sideways knit hat, then you know where to look, i.e. me, because I tend to do an awful lot of sideways knit hats. I rather like them. You can find information about sideways knit hats and extra photo tutorials about various short row methods all on my website. Okay. If you can do the like, subscribe thing and help my YouTube channel grow so I can get my techniques out to other people, that would be fantastic. Thank you. So thanks for your time today. Have fun with your stitches. I'll see you next time.